welcome back to Reclaim You. Abby and I are here today, and we're talking about how to break up with your therapist.
Even when you say that, like my stomach starts to do all these funny things because from the client perspective, like me as a client, I don't know, it makes me super anxious. So
Yeah.
even just talking about that or even hearing you say that, I'm like, ooh, I don't know.
Uh-huh.
Feels
Yeah,
funny.
it does. And even we were talking before we hit record about just the words breaking up with your therapist. It's intense, but the other words that were taught in school are perhaps more intense, equally as intense. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, we learn in school that, when the therapy relationship ends, technically the process is called termination. And I mean, I remember even anyone teaching that or when we read about it, there's always the caveat of like, this term is really intense. And maybe sometimes that equals the intensity of the experience. However, often in my experience, I mean, at least personally, in sort of parting ways with a therapist, it hasn't been that level of intensity of like termination. Like, what an intense
Termination.
word.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the marker in our medical record system. We mark people active and inactive. That might feel a little better. Like this relationship is inactive.
Yeah, or like on pause, or I don't know, there's got to be some other language to just, I mean, I like part ways, like
Part ways.
part ways, because breakup too, you think of whether it be a romantic relationship breakup, a friend breakup, it's like break up. How intense is that?
It is
Um,
intense. Yeah.
maybe part ways feels a little bit smoother.
Yeah, and even part ways honors like the legacy of the relationship, whether it's like a long relationship or a short relationship or a very, very, very short relationship, right? There could still be some legacy to that relationship that carries on.
And there's room for, I mean, just as with breakups or termination, I guess, I don't know, part ways kind of gives this, it feels like the door's always open, which is the case for
Mhm.
us as therapists. Like our door is
Yes.
open. And if we ever want to reconnect, that's always a possibility.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Within
anyway,
our control, right?
true. So
Yes.
true.
Yes. Absolutely. So I'm curious for you, and I can share my experiences too, about pausing relationships, or maybe there have been some therapy breakups for you, the intensity of it. But how has that looked for you? How do you navigate that?
Yeah. I've had personally a few different experiences parting ways with therapists. Let's see. One instance where logistically I wasn't able to make things happen. So more like financial insurance, like those pieces weren't in place for me to continue the relationship. And so that felt really, at least for me, easier because there was this tangible barrier that stood in the way. And similarly, I think there was an experience of I was moving and we just couldn't continue to work together for that reason. So those experiences, while challenging, because for one of those therapists I had a really strong relationship with, and so even though there was like a logistic reason for me needing to part ways, easy in that sense of easy to communicate why, more challenging because of the relationship that we had. And I can speak more to, what that process was like and honoring the relationship and reflecting back and all of that good stuff. Let me think. There was, I guess, yeah, those are the two logistical ones. There was one therapist that I worked with for a short time. And we tell this to all clients, friends, whomever, that finding the right therapist can take a lot of time and it can require multiple meetings with different therapists to, vibe check. Is
Vibe
this
check. Hmm.
someone that I can see myself working with? Do I feel like they get it? So ultimately, I started to work with this one therapist and it was fine. However, I didn't really feel like I could be my full self. But I continued to give it a try. And maybe it just, like with any relationship, being able to be open and vulnerable does take time. So there was that happening in the back of my mind. Maybe this is just something that's taking a little bit more time. And then there were certain things that, that therapist was saying that I didn't necessarily, uh, for lack of a better word, like agree with.
Hmm.
It felt like there were some strong differences in our values, which maybe
Hmm.
shouldn't have been coming up. And it wasn't a fit. Let's just put it that
Hmm.
way. We were not a fit. The vibe was no longer
It was not there.
there. It was
Yeah.
not there. And that there was like just one moment in particular where I felt, this isn't working for me, and it doesn't mean that this person is a bad person. It doesn't mean this therapist is a bad therapist. It simply means we're just not a fit. And so that was harder for me because there wasn't that tangible logistical reason of maybe finances
Uh,
or insurance or I'm moving. It
hmm.
really was a fit question. And so
Yep.
there were all these thoughts dancing around in my head of do I say that? Do I share that? Do we try to work it out? But I felt pretty strongly with it, in myself that this really isn't a fit and I don't really feel the need to like work it out or talk about how I'm feeling about this. And so just very transparently, I emailed her to say, hey, I don't think that this is something that I want to continue with at this time. Thank you so much. If it's
Hmm.
okay with you, perhaps I'll be in touch in the future. Again, the door's open. And that was that. And
Yeah.
she was super lovely in her response, very understanding. And we parted ways.
And you parted
So
ways.
the
Yep.
intensity wasn't as intense as I had anticipated it.
Hmm.
I was really anxious that I don't know, would there be questions or would I need to explain myself?
Uh, Would there be
That
like a demand for a termination session?
Yeah, yeah, and it felt
Hmm.
really nice to just I want to compare it to dating. Like I feel like a lot of us can imagine
Hmm.
with perhaps dates, you try it out a few times and again, you're giving it some time and it's just things are just not clicking. Again, not a fault of that person, not a
Yeah.
fault of ourselves. It's just not a fit. And so
Yeah.
in the dating world, I also think it's more than fair to just maybe send a text like, "Hey, I'm in whatever way you want to say it, this is just no longer working for me. And so
Right.
wishing you the
Right.
best." And
Hmm.
hopefully, like, just as I received sort of this receptive, kind response, that's the hope.
Yeah. I love that. I love that it was like a positive experience for you. And I would imagine, at least for me, the people pleaser stuff comes up really strong
Yeah.
when ending relationships of any kind, but
Mhm.
particularly with therapists and overthinking all of the things. But, maybe staying for myself, maybe staying in therapeutic relationships for too long because of not knowing how to say this is no longer working for me. Or so, like, that just to say, if anyone listening has experienced that, is experiencing that, like, we get it, right? We probably have experienced similar things in our own relationships with therapists and other type of practitioners and things like that. But it's really hard to, worry about like, will this person make meaning of this and think that, our relationship wasn't valuable, or, think that I don't like them or something. We can go into the great abyss of making meaning about this, but it's hard to end relationships, especially when someone's held a lot of your vulnerable stuff and maybe it worked for you in one season of your life, and in this season of your life it just isn't it. And it's not like a character flaw, it could just be that you need something different. So I've done similar things of like emailing and saying, I'm gonna pause for now, and you know see where life leads me, and just kind of leaving it there. And honestly, like, I've ghosted someone before. I totally
Fair.
have, where it didn't feel safe enough to even email and say, I'm going to pause, or this isn't working for me, or whatever it is. So it's all super valid.
Yeah. And I imagine when, let's say, the therapy relationship is going on, like, for example, the relationship that I had with that therapist that parted ways with, it wasn't a long term
Mhm.
relationship. So that allowed me to feel like certainly the people pleaser
Angsty.
was right there with me, very present,
Yeah.
worried about how might this land for the other person. Oh my
Mhm.
goodness. And almost so much so where I was like, let me just give it another try. And I maybe that would just continue to happen. I
Yeah.
was able to pause that and say, but actually, like, I know there's something like in my heart of hearts that this is just not working right now.
Mhm.
But I do imagine, like, if you're in a longer therapy relationship with a provider, it gets harder and harder.
Mm-hmm.
maybe for
Mm-hmm.
some, because of all that you've maybe shared with that person, all that they're
Mm-hmm.
holding. Yeah. Yeah, there's just so much nuance to really ending any relationship, but especially one
Absolutely.
that is so intimate and
Mm-hmm.
so, again, ideally in therapy, there is that vulnerability that maybe you don't have with just anyone in your
Mm-hmm.
life. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's something really different about parting ways with that person.
Absolutely. And it feels important to say, like, there's no right or wrong way, right? There's no right or wrong way. And I think we can speak on the therapist side to be a therapist and to have people move on, to part ways, to pause, to ghost, whatever it is, like we get it. And I'll speak on behalf of all of us in our practice. We hope that we can create the space and the environment where people can be open to say whatever it is that they need to say, even
Mhm.
if it's just like, I'm not coming anymore and like whatever. Or, you said this thing and it's really impacted me. So I think that I'm going to terminate the relationship. To acknowledge that's really hard. And we hope to create the experience and the environment where that's possible for people to navigate really difficult conversations.
Yeah, there is no right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
These relationships are so nuanced, and therefore communicating that this is no longer working is really
Mm-hmm.
challenging for many reasons. And yeah, I think I can speak for all of us too. Like, we welcome really all of it because we get
Mm-hmm.
it. And I mean, you mentioned something before of like demanding, like maybe some have
Mm-hmm.
had the experience of, oh, you're wanting to part ways, you're wanting to pause. We really need to have a session to wrap things up and talk about our relationship and all these things. And I'm just imagining if my therapist at the time had said that in response to my email of like, I need to pause, that would have been really anxiety provoking for me, because again, the people
Uh-huh.
pleaser would have maybe said, okay, but really not
Sure. Like what time? I'll
wanting to
be
do.
there.
Yeah. And it just felt really freeing to be able to make the choice to leave something that was not serving me and have
Mhm.
that be respected.
Yeah.
Um,
Like trusting yourself enough to make that decision and having that held and
yeah,
respected and honored. Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. So I know that if we, from the therapist side, if something's not working for someone and they want to pause or they want to part ways or they want to take a break, we're like, absolutely, like, we honor all of it. And we might, maybe we'll extend the invitation of like, if you want to talk about it, we're here,
Mm-hmm.
but it's an invitation. That's all that
Right.
is. And I
Right.
feel like that's really important because, again, the choice is always yours. If something's not serving you, you can leave that. So yeah, it felt important when you said that, because it can feel really uncomfortable and awkward to have to rehash all the stuff that maybe you didn't love about the therapy relationship or about the therapy itself. And again, I always go back to like, maybe it has nothing to do with the people involved. It's just, again, we're not a fit, and that's
Yeah.
okay. We can't
Mm-hmm.
be a fit for everyone. And
Right.
I kind of always go back to friendships and dating. If we were for everyone in the friendship scene or in the dating scene,
Mm-hmm.
whew, I can't even imagine. Like, it
Yeah,
just
that'd be
feels so natural
overwhelming.
for that to be the case in dating and
Mhm.
friendships. It's harder in this space when it feels like it's not a fit.
Yeah. Yeah. It sure is. And I feel like there are so many options, right? Like the options are, and I'll probably miss some. So feel free to fill in the gaps. Like you
Yeah.
could ghost somebody. That's certainly an
Mhm.
option. Like you have every right to ghost someone if you so choose, right?
Yeah.
We could go into the dynamics around it, but we won't. This it's an option, right? To just be like, okay, I'm just not gonna email, I'm not gonna reschedule, I'm not gonna whatever. Option, sure. There's also talking about it in session, saying if you are able to do this is something I struggle with. I'm working on it, right? Like this isn't feeling like it's a fit, and I really want to shift and try something different. Or do you have recommendations for someone who I could see for X, Y, and Z? Or just like I feel like our work is done, right? You could also
Mhm.
email. Email is perfectly acceptable to say whatever it is that you need to say. Texting, right? Anything is fine. I guess that's the summary of all of this. Is anything is fine.
Really anything. Yeah, like the options are kind of endless, it feels like, as to how
Mm-hmm.
you can part ways with a therapist. And one thing I was thinking about as you were talking about the different ways, when you were mentioning we could talk about this or find a better fit, there might also be the case, it may be the case that it's like, no, I actually really do feel a connection with this person, but I don't love the direction we're going in.
Yes.
And I can picture myself in certain situations. Maybe there'd be a part of me that's like, I feel this connection, but I don't love the direction we're going in. Bounce, I'm out, I'm done. Like there's no
Uh-huh.
way to talk about this. So I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess another invitation, this is way easier said than done, but like that feels like a really important opportunity to bring that in to the extent that it's comfortable. You
Yep.
know, I really appreciate X, Y, and Z about our work. And I feel a strong connection to you. I feel like I can be open and vulnerable or whatever the case may be. And also, we've been like, you know, working in this way for some time. And maybe initially I thought it was the direction I wanted to go in, but can we maybe reassess? Can we pause and reassess what it is that
Mm-hmm.
we're doing?
Yeah.
I know that again, I think I can speak for all of us. Like we strive to work really collaboratively. This is
Mm-hmm.
our client's time. And so if there is ever this sense that, no, this feels like a fit, but something's off right now. What a
Mm-hmm.
powerful opportunity. And also how hard that is to bring in.
How hard
And I
that
know for
is.
myself, like it's so
Mm-hmm.
hard because for me, what comes up is, how will this person feel? Are they going to feel like they're doing
Mm-hmm.
a terrible job? Oh my
Mm-hmm.
goodness, what am I going to stir up within them?
Yep.
Or am I being too much? Am I asking for too much? Or,
Mm-hmm.
maybe there might be other questions that come up for
Yep.
folks when they think of this, but
Yeah, totally. And I think from the therapy side, maybe not all the time, but often when it's time to part ways, there's this like kind of intuitive knowing, especially with clients who, I've been working with for a really long time and I've seen through different seasons of life, even if we're going to pause or part ways or whatever, right? It's kind of like this knowing that, yeah, you're right. It is. And that's okay. You know, not that the relationship isn't valid and meaningful for both parties, for therapist and client. It can still be okay to just like take a little break.
yeah, and I feel like my mind is going in the direction of the opposite situation. Let's say I feel like I'm in a really good place, or like the intentions that I've set for myself in this therapy work, I've kind of like met in some ways, or I feel like I'm really just like smooth sailing, like things
Mhm.
are good, but I don't want to lose this relationship. I don't want to leave. And I felt that in one of my therapy relationships. And I imagine this to be true for others as well. Like, oh, wait, I feel like I'm kind of in this good place, but does that mean that we have to part ways? Does that mean that I have to leave? And my answer is no. Like,
No,
with my
no.
therapist that I have such a strong relationship with, we've had so many iterations of therapy, and there was a time where, you know, maybe we saw each other less frequently. Maybe there was a time that we were seeing each other just as frequently, but like maybe talking about totally different things than I had been talking about whatever months, year, whatever ago.
Hmm.
So that
Hmm.
just came to my mind that, well, what if I get better, quotes,
Uh-huh.
recover, quotes, like
Hmm.
hit my goals, quotes,
Quotes. Yep.
does that mean I need to lose this relationship?
Right.
There's a lot in that. And so I guess the answer is like, no, you don't have, like,
No.
perhaps you don't have to.
Yeah, and maybe parting ways does look like just shifting lanes, right? I guess that's not parting ways. That's like joining and shifting into a different. I'm thinking about highways, right? Like you're on this highway of working towards these goals, and like sometimes you like shift down to seeing someone biweekly, monthly for a little while until life starts getting lifey and you feel like you need more support, right? The relationship doesn't always have to end. It can shift and like transform and shape shift over time into what you need it to be. And
Yeah.
maybe you go and try somebody else, right? Try a different style. You do an EMDR intensive. I don't know, go on a retreat or something. And then you come back. There's that door being always open. And you pick up at this different, spot in your life and trust and know that this relationship can hold all of it.
Flexibility feels really calming to me. Initially, when we said like breaking up with our therapist, terminating with our therapist, and I felt all those like jumbly feelings, now it's like, there's flexibility. Like there's no right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Things don't have to necessarily terminate, they can just
Mm-hmm.
shift. And
Mm-hmm.
we can always change our minds too. I feel like that's a really powerful reminder that I have to offer up to myself a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess when you're if you're considering, oh, I'm wondering if I should, break up with my therapist, part ways with my therapist. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like that's an important time if you have other support people to like run it by them to see, here's what I'm thinking. What do you think? Not that we need to have other people tell us what to do, but I know for myself, I really needed a processor because it's interesting,
Mm-hmm.
right? Some people's main processors are therapists.
Yeah.
And so if you're struggling in your relationship with your therapist, who do you talk to about
Who do you
that? If
talk
that's your
to?
main
Yes.
processor.
Uh-huh.
That can be really challenging. So I guess if there are other support people in your life, whether professionally, personally, might be worth looping them in too. Because
Yeah.
how tricky is that? When the person maybe you talk to about all the things, you can't feels really hard to talk about this one thing.
Yeah. And I was just thinking about the patterns that we can sometimes notice within ourselves, even playing out in, taking a break or ending relationships, right? When things get, I'm like, when things get real, when things get really vulnerable, right? And maybe you're like entering into a different phase of working with your therapist and it starts to feel uncomfortable because you're experiencing things maybe you haven't experienced before, like a new level of vulnerability. Or you're opening up doors that are like, oh my gosh, I knew this was here and I don't know if I'm ready to face this. So like I'm just gonna bounce. I'm gonna go, like talk about fight or flight, like I'm gonna run, I'm gonna ghost, like I'm done, right? Like I get it because I've done that. So being able to just be really curious with yourself and your impulse to, not respond or to just completely ghost or whatever it is this a familiar pattern in some way? And just being really curious about that. Does this feel really safe to do because it feels so hard to be even more vulnerable in the fact that this isn't working for me or whatever it is? So it could be a little invitation for yourself internally to say, does this feel familiar? Am I engaging in a pattern that I may have engaged in the past? And what do I want to do with that? Like maybe you want
Mhm.
to follow through with ghosting or, shutting the door on the relationship. That's okay. But can it also be an invitation for you to get curious about the way that your system is working, the way that like attachment is showing up in these moments? It can be really powerful just to be curious about those things.
And I almost wonder if that, for those of us who do struggle to like bring bring up what's happening in our relationship into the room for a lot of different reasons. I wonder if that's like an interesting entry point,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
of
Yeah.
like, okay, we've been talking about my patterns in these ways in relationships. Again, even saying it, like it's hard, it's really challenging, but can like
Mm-hmm.
in some way, shape, or form, can we talk about our relationship?
Mm-hmm.
And there can be something so powerful about that, talking
Yeah.
about how it feels to be in relationship with someone, with that person.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like there's so many people in our lives that maybe we don't feel comfortable, safe, ready to do that with. It's
Mm-hmm.
just really weird, awkward. If there's any space to do that in the therapy relationship, it can be really powerful.
Yeah.
And again, it's really, really hard.
It's hard.
So it's also
It's
okay if
hard.
that doesn't happen. But that's what that all just made me think about when we're
Yeah.
thinking about our relationship patterns, how interesting it can be to talk about the relationship.
Totally. And I think for me as a therapist, I try to keep this in mind, right? Because these are such hard conversations. This whole conversation is talking about how hard this is, right? I
Mhm.
try to keep that in mind in working with folks and like checking in, like, did I just really piss you off? Like when I can sense I said something that pissed someone off, so that we can engage in these types of conversations outside of just, changing course or taking a break or parting ways, checking in of how is this feeling? What do you need more from me? What do you need less from me? But that's something that I often do to try to normalize the conversation a little bit more, to say
Mhm.
we can engage in these like repair processes throughout, so that when or if you feel ready to move on or if something's not working, we have a platform in which we can operate from. It doesn't have to be so abrupt.
Yeah, and it can, I mean, that those types of conversations can then ripple out maybe to like other relationships in our lives as well. Like to be able to have that reparative conversation. I don't know, there's something really that maybe can be really healing about that. Like, oh, I can just like tell someone what you just said to me I didn't love, like
Mhm.
that hit a nerve within me,
Mhm.
and to
Mhm.
like be able to share that and maybe have that person, right? Ideally in the therapy relationship of all relationships, like we can hear
Mhm.
that and
Yeah.
talk about it. Again, an opportunity.
And really
Yeah.
hard.
Really hard. I'm
Mhm.
I'm still working on it.
Right? Same. Same.
Yeah.
And back to the fact that, you can trust yourself. You can trust yourself if things aren't feeling the way that you want them to feel. And hopefully you have a foundation of a relationship with your therapist that you can start to address that and come up with a game plan of what's going to work and what's going to feel better, whether that's staying in the relationship or finding a different relationship or just like going without for a little while, because that's also super valid.
And I also just thought that there might be for some this like fear or worry, and really valid worry of, okay, well, if I part ways with this therapist, will I be able to find another one?
Hmm.
Um,
Yep.
and then also like, I'm going to have to start over with my story and all the things. So like very valid, so real. And I guess while this isn't like a 100% foolproof solution, that could also be a conversation around, okay, if this isn't a fit, what might more of a fit look like in therapy? Do I want someone more directive? Do I want someone who's going to
Yeah.
give me homework? Like there's
Yeah.
all these different things. And
Yeah.
maybe this person's style is just not that.
Hmm.
Maybe it's like, okay, I'm continuing to work with this therapist as I continue to do research for,
Hmm.
like, I don't know, like these are just options, I guess. Or again, like you said earlier in the conversation, asking for referrals. But that would make a lot of sense to me, that that would be a big
Yeah.
concern when
Yeah.
thinking about parting ways.
Any other thoughts to close us out?
A thought that I'm having is that life is awkward and therefore therapy is awkward. Therapy is
Yes,
especially awkward.
it
And
is.
can awkward be okay? I feel like we shy
Hmm.
away from, I say we because I shy away from awkwardness,
I'm
as
with
if
you.
life can just be like totally calm, cool, collected all the time. It's just so not that way. We're just like awkward human beings, and that's cool. Awkward can
Yeah.
be cool too. And therapy can be super awkward. And I guess this is nothing profound, but that's okay.
Yeah.
And so goodbyes are awkward, parting ways is awkward. Maybe we
Ghosting and then
maybe
coming back is awkward.
maybe we just challenge ourselves to embrace the awkwardness, is my last thought. I want to challenge myself to embrace more awkwardness.
Mhm. I'm with you. It's a solid challenge. All right, everyone. If you want to hear more about this or have any questions about this, we're happy to follow up on the podcast or on Instagram or wherever. So, yeah, let us know.
Well, thank you. This was fun. Fun to talk
Yeah.
about. Awkward and fun.
Awkward and fun. That's what we're all about. Yeah. All right, everyone. We'll be back next week for another episode. And until then, take good care.